What's up Tankers, Archy here, and today I finally have a gameplay video out. It's not the one I promised a little while ago, but I hope you like this one even more. I had the opportunity to make a surprise for you and make a video of the most recent map changes with my friends, so hope you enjoy. Let's go one popular map at a time and talk a little bit about the changes in it. For the most part, only control points were added to the maps, but some maps also have visual changes. Some props were changed around and some props were added, so it's pretty awesome. How about we start with the silence map, since for no reason it seems to be the most popular one. The first thing you will notice, which you already did probably from the official Facebook post about the map changes, are the fields and the walls added around silence to make it look bigger. I really love this, and despite the suspicions in the forum about tons more lag, I only lost a couple frames per second, which I would happily trade for the realisticness that this change adds. There are 3 control points on the map, one on top of the wall, one on the bottom, and one on the platform opposite. It would seem the Reds have an advantage since they have 2 control points near their base, but in reality it only takes a quick drop for the Blues to sabotage the point under the wall, so I think this is a pretty decent CP layout. This map also introduces us to a new prop, that brown board with a little skull on it, which pretty much signifies the self-destruct zone, or as I like to call it, sudden death. Since this update is primarily about the addition of control point mode to most maps, let's talk about that for a second. Something that changed pretty drastically as far as I noticed is the spawn system. Before, players would spawn near the points captured by their team, if any. Now players will mostly spawn near their base or on their half of the map, regardless of which control points they have conquered. I also like this idea as it encourages team coordination instead of random players running off to the distant parts of the map to hog an unprotected point. Now players will have to work together to protect the points near their base and also keep fighting for the more distant points to have an advantage. I suspect that the points closer to each of the team bases will almost always belong to that team, and mostly the central points will be fought over, so let's see how this goes. Let's move on to Highland, which also got a huge surroundings update, similar to Silence. Some road and wall extensions and extra hills, but all in the self-destruct zone of course. The points are placed diagonally across the map, one on the hill by the big wall, one in the center, and one on the hill between the houses. Now the latter point, which is B by the way, seemed fishy to me at first. It seems that it's very secluded since the opposing team can't reach it from behind the house. C, its counterpart, is very susceptible to long-range attacks. I thought this was misbalanced, but after a while I realized that the same seclusion works against it as well. While C is easy to defend because you can see enemies coming from a mile away, B is hard to defend because a surprise attack of 2 or 3 tanks is easy to orchestrate from the hill below. Balanced indeed. Let's check out a smaller map like Island. Island wasn't really changed much aside from adding extra space on the sides and putting palm trees on them, although I guess for a map with so few props this is a pretty big change. The single control point is placed directly in the middle, making for a rather stagnant gameplay in my opinion, but then again I think the same of CTF on Island, and yet I see it being played all the time, so maybe you'll love this too. Now that we've looked at a couple maps, I want to insert a little interesting note about the control points layout. I've noticed a consistent system of control point placements throughout the map, and though I'm no level design expert, it's obvious that the positioning directly affects the gameplay. We have a centralized layout, where all the action is pretty much packed in the center, whether it's a line or a single point. Smaller maps usually have only one control point, like Island, Combe, Boombox, and Sandal. Fort Knox is also a centralized map, but it has 4 control points in the center, while Factory has 2 points right on top of each other. Bigger maps have an entire line of CPs in the middle, such as Rift, Cross, Stadium, Red Alert, Zone, and others. Barda and Bridges control point games will probably slightly resemble CTF games, since the control points are nearly at the same places as the flags, plus the central one. Both Barda and Bridges have nearly identical CP layouts, what I like to call the diagonal layout, where each team has a control point on their base, mirroring the opponent's control point, plus another one in the middle. I'm very curious to see how these types of games will play out, because even though each point will almost always belong to the team on whose base it's placed, it will be much easier to sneak around and capture it while the opponents are busy fighting for the central point, where the majority of the action is. This type of layout is used in maps such as Highland, which we've already seen, Madness, partially, Monte Carlo as we already know, oh and 2 more points are added, Bobruisk, Wave, Factory, and others. Massacre, to my surprise, only had 3 control points, but that brings me to another simple layout which is also linear, but instead of going diagonally or across the center, it goes straight from base to base. This will result in a pretty direct and aggressive gameplay, with little sneaking and mostly just brute force. This linear layout is applied in Esplanade, kinda, and Tribute in a weird way, and some others. Let's look at the larger, more symmetrical layouts, like the X and the plus layouts as I like to call them. They're pretty self-descriptive. The control points are placed mostly along a plus or X shape throughout the map. But contrary to what you might have thought, these 2 layouts will result in totally different gameplay, considering an X layout makes for 2 points on each base and 1 central point, resulting in easier attacking and harder defending, and a plus layout makes only 1 control point on each base and 3 or more control points along the center, making for easy defense and a more active attack. Iran, Desert, and Subway use the X layout, to name a few, while Dusseldorf, Kungor, Scope, Future, Industrial Zone, kinda, Parma, Atra, and many others use this plus layout, making it one of the preferred designs. And for good reason, since the action is spread out evenly along the center line, but still attention has to be given to the base point and its defense, probably making it the most dynamic layout. I was in for a big surprise when I entered Farm and noticed that the control point is way off to the side of the map. I guess the devs already had this in mind when the first map change update came along, because the point fits snugly into the hole in the fence. This is one more design I found interesting and is what I call decentralized. Pretty much the control point, or group of control points, is moved away from the center of the map. At first I found this quite odd, but then I realized that this might be the best layout for players who like to support their team with longer range without being in the center of action. This way they can stay on the side where there are no control points and help their team without any interference. Here in Farm you can also use to your advantage the fact that you can sneak up on your enemies from behind and sabotage their defense. Some maps that use this technique are Kungor, Slightly, Novel, Industrial Zone, and Tribute. Of course, some maps just have a more random CP setup, which doesn't fall into any category, but I've come to believe that they are well placed and might even be more interesting than symmetrical layouts, mostly because there are so many different approaches to each point. Silence, Madness, Abyss, and Industrial Zone are all pretty random. So I already mentioned that Iran uses the X layout, which gives it 2 more control points than the previous version. But on top of that, it was expanded visually. The sides of the map are a little wider, covered in the self-destruct zone, which means that you can never be too careful when driving on the edge, lest you blow up. I really love the new Rift, both the visual expansion and the placement of the control points. The hills around you just make you feel cozy or something, even though you can't really climb them since you will self-destruct right away, but nevertheless they are cool. The control points, as I said earlier, are placed in one line, 2 on each side of the wall, and 1 in the ditch in the middle. The drastic difference in the height of the control points will make it hard to camp, since people will constantly be jumping down and then climbing back up to take charge of the control points. The bridge makes it easier to defend the upper 2 control points if you already have them captured, but still, can't be at both places at the same time. Subway, not much to say except that it uses the infamous X layout, which means it will be quite a defensive map. On the other hand, interestingly enough, all the spawn points are underneath the ground in the subway, which means that if you die you will have a long way to drive before getting back to defending the point, which again balances out the game. Dusseldorf is, well, huge. It has a total of 7 control points in a blend of diagonal and plus layouts, literally. Don't know how dynamic this battle will be, but it's suitable for the huge amount of tanks that usually inhabit Dusseldorf, so I expect it to contain some decent battles. Kungor is technically a plus style layout, but because the main bridge is away from the center, the entire CP layout seems off, as though it's decentralized. I have a feeling that most of the fighting will be up top, since 3 of the 5 control points are off the ground, and the other 2 are close by on the train tracks. Nevertheless, the rest of the map makes for good cover when you want to sneak around and capture an unattended point. Madness is, as expected, pretty mad. Aside from the diagonal layout along the base, the rest of the 7 control points randomly show themselves on the numerous platforms that hover above, and fighting for those will be pure chaos. Then again, that's why we all loved Madness in the first place, and I hope it'll come back to its previous glory. Scope is pretty big too, with its 7 control points symmetrically placed around the map. While each team will probably control the points closest to them, the central point is a tricky one considering it's way below the ground and is quite easy to defend, so make sure you get to it first. Novels surprised me the most when it comes to decentralized control point clusters. One control point is on the train tracks in the middle, the other 4 are on the far end of the map. I call it the far end since most of the spawn points are on the opposite end, so it will always be a mad race to see who will get to that site first. When you get there though, the battle is pretty scary since all the control points are so close to each other. Combe and Sandal both lost 2 control points, leaving each one with only 1 central CP, which will force a more aggressive, less stagnant approach, which will hopefully make this mode more fun on these maps. Future uses the plus layout, but still it's pretty interesting that 2 of the points are opposite each other and on top of buildings of similar height, which means that you can defend them and support your attacking teammates by shooting at the opposite control point. This is interesting since none of the other maps have that. Other than that, it's a standard plus layout with the control points placed on the little platforms, which is cool. Cross surprised me with the fact that the control points just line the top, meaning no cover and terrible defense, so it'll just be a jumble of dying tanks, and mad racing to the top. But then again, what else happens in Cross? Fort Knox was unique to me because of the centralized but multi-point layout that it offered. If it was me, I would have probably placed some control points near the base, while others on the wall, but this layout turned out to be cool. I kind of felt like a current of a river going around in a circle fighting off the control points, while at the same time being chased by my opponents who wanted to get their control point back. So if you don't have the stomach for dizziness, don't play this battle, or at least sit on the top and pick off the evil opponents with a railgun or something. Wave was same as usual, although the control points were all in the center, forcing all the tanks to attack, instead of the usual camp on the top of the hill and blast the opposite side. I like it because it's a small map, but a big map at the same time, making almost any weapon a good choice, while the random terrain puts your skills to the test. Stadium will probably be the usual place where molts hang out in the middle and collect crystals, while the XP pumpers sit on the sides and pick each other off. But now these molts will stop being molts because they will be capturing the control points, intentionally or not, dotted along the middle of the stadium. No kill, I take crystals! Parma was one of the funner maps for CT, and we played with hornets and railguns, so it was no easy feat. And yet we managed to make a pretty dynamic battle with little to no camping. The points constantly change color, which is a good sign, and the walls everywhere constantly test your precision skills, so you might really like this map and mode if you're into long-range guns. Factory was unique in the way that it had 1 control point over the other, in addition to the diagonal layout. 2 vertical levels of playing always adds more fun since you can jump down to save your teammate or to ambush an unsuspecting defender. That's that. I hope you found it slightly interesting and not too long and boring. If your favorite map wasn't in the list, sorry, let me know and I'll find an excuse to talk about it some other time. After checking out all these maps, I'm really curious to play some decent control point on them, so if you see me in one of them, hop right in. This was Archangel, thanks for watching, good luck, and see you in the fields of battle.